All right, guys and gals, I wanted to do another update on Frank, the 2010 F250 King Ranch with the Cummins swap. And finally got a day with some good weather. And I've also been working on the truck, trying to get everything worked out and figured out. And so we will take a look right quick, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those for you. I bought this truck out of Texas and had it shipped here to North Carolina. So it's a rust-free truck, and it has just a little over 200,000 miles when I bought it with the original 6.4 engine. I've had a couple 6.4s in the past, and I'll be honest with you, I know a lot of guys do have good luck with them, but I have had terrible luck with 6.4s on all accounts. I've had several 6.0s, and the ones I did have trouble, once you fix the issues, they're a solid engine, but I just never have been able to get a 6.4 to be reliable and stay together without without a lot of work. And from what I understand, it's very, very pricey to get a good solid basically a good solid engine internally. That's not gonna give you trouble, but I know it can be done. Just saying that I haven't been able to do it with the limited funds, and not just looking to invest a fortune. So this truck, we got it, we drove it for a while and had pretty good luck with it. Just drove it around local, didn't work it very hard. It did great, really. It had the typical 6.4 blow by, and had a few minor oil leaks. But anyway, it did okay. And so I have a pretty good sized fifth wheel camper that we tow, and I had a 6.0 flatbed truck that we towed it with. And so wanted to get this truck ready to tow and put a hitch in it last spring. I believe it was maybe in the month of June or July. We took this truck and the camper down off the mountain here and went camping. And when I brought it back at the end of the week, coming back up the mountain after the first heavy grade, the 6.4 let go on me. And basically what happened is I happened to look out the passenger mirror and I had a bunch of smoke there, like oil smoke. So I pulled over, raised the hood, and had oil all over everything around the air filter. And as soon as I raised the hood, I actually was standing there looking to see what was going on, and the truck started skipping. So anyway, I managed to get it off the road and unhooked from the camper and brought the camper home, and had a friend bring a trailer and bring this truck home. Found out that, of course, I was hoping to be something simple, but got it home and found out that it was something internal. So I had to make a decision on either repair what I had or replace it. And so I'd been reading about the Cummins swaps, and that's what I chose to do. The gentleman who bought the 6.4 as a core sent me a picture, and it had melted down a piston inside the 6.4 engine. Supposedly, he seemed to think that basically I had an injector overfuel or hang, whatever you want to call it, while I was towing. And of course, you may not notice that with a lot of boost and all of that. You maybe wouldn't see any extra fuel smoke like you would if it happened, sitting here in the yard. You'd see it overfueling. So anyway, that's what happened to the 6.4. I checked on the prices to get the 6.4 built, and we were looking at probably close to $15,000, not including my time to pull it and ship it out and get it back in. Around $15,000 to make it basically nearly indestructible internally. And that would have left me still having potentially turbo issues and injector issues down the road, which could take the motor out again. And I know that any hard-worked engine can let go at any time, and the Cummins that's in here now can do the same thing. I understand that, but just had really bad run with 6.4s and decided to go with the Cummins. So I'll tell you, before we get into this, I haven't had a chance to straighten up much under the hood. I've been working on trying to get the exhaust brake to work right and the shift schedule like I want it to be. And so I'll show you what's under the hood first. We'll start there, and I'll tell you what all I did, and then be glad to do anything individually. If somebody has questions, we'll certainly address something specifically in another video. So this is a compound setup. It's a 369 up here. You won't be able to see it, but it's a HE 351 down there with a larger exhaust housing and enlarged wastegate. And it does not have an external wastegate. I've been told I needed to put one on here, but I'm basically controlling it with the fueling on the tuner, and also how hard you're pressing on the accelerator. So you just have to watch things. Imported as many of the 6.4 sensors as I could for the transmission shift strategies, and still using the factory 6.4 PCM, and as I said, as many of the sensors as I can, and then also the TCM for the 6.4, for the 5R110. I did all the piping. My plan is, and it looks like it's probably going to be fall of this year, I welded up all my intercooler pipes, and this one needs a little modification. It sits too hard against that intake pipe there. It's not as bad as it looks, but I want to try to modify that radius a bit. Once I get these fitting the way I want, I'll pull them off and either weld up some really nice ones, or I may have a shop do it. I'm not sure. I reused a 6.4 intercooler. It's working fine for me. I do not drive the truck like this normally, but just to be sure that none of these boots are going to blow off while I'm towing, I did take it up to about 60 psi one time for a few seconds, and everything held. I've heard that these tanks can bust pretty easy. If that happens, then when that time comes, I'll replace it. I have an auxiliary transcooler that I've added just for the sake of, peace of mind. I have the swap helper tack adapter. I'll try to get you a better angle. Right there. Down here. Made the bracket to mount it up. The Quadzilla adrenaline module is down here beside the battery tray. I did not change the battery trays because I wanted to keep the factory coolant reservoir, overflow bottle, degas, whatever you call it. So I have a custom fitting right here, and that right there is actually a piece of hose that goes back to the degas tank. Probably going to change that. Didn't realize it at the time, but you can actually run these down underneath the fan and back up, and probably not going to be able to see this, but let's see. So that's a custom AC and alternator bracket. Down there below the AC, the alternator is a port that you can come out of, and it's about the right size to connect up to the hose for the degas tank. And it puts it's down probably 6 inches under the alternator, so that gets your, as far as getting coolant in it, goes in a lot quicker than this particular setup here. You almost have to park the truck with that side of the truck uphill to get it completely full of coolant, but did manage to get it filled up, so no worries for now. I'll probably change that this fall. So I have the grid heaters here hooked up to a 200 amp continuous duty solenoid there, and that is wired to a manual switch in the truck. I'll try to remember to show you that excuse me, in a little bit. That way I can operate on myself. What I found is with this truck, if it's 25 degrees or above, it cranks just fine without the grid heater. If it's 25 or below, depending on how cold it is, and to be honest, we've had a couple of days in the teens, but we're almost done with winter, so it's going to be hard to really to test this out. But what I seem to have found, if it's 25 or below, down to say in the teens, maybe about 8 or 10 seconds on the button, and it fires right up. And then we had one day when it was down in the teens, down maybe 15 degrees or so, and I held it about 12 or 13 seconds, and then it fired right up. So let's see what else we got under here that we could show you. I did wire up an OBD2. It is possible, guys, and I have some information on this if you need wiring schematics, but I wired up an OBD2 port. This is for the Cummins ECM that bolts on the side of the block. This right here. So you can read the Cummins. You're not gonna be able to see it. I remote mounted my ECM. Actually, maybe I'll see it. It's right there. I did not mount it over here on the block. I moved it over here, trying to alleviate a little bit of heat off of it. But anyway, so you can access that ECM, the Cummins ECM, on the 24 valve and wire you up an OBD2 port and read codes. Now, my cheap code scanner will not read those, but I have like a $200 one from Advance or AutoZone that will read it, and I have a Snap-on that will read it as well. So if you guys are needing to see codes or whatever on your Cummins engine, it can be done. I have the schematics on that and the wiring and all that stuff. You can buy these things here on Amazon and wire them right in. I wanted to clean up the wiring when everything's said and done. These are the 2 required relays for the swap. These are engine related relays and for the Cummins. So they're just wired in. Everything's tied up tidy, and it's not going to go anywhere or cause any issues. This fall I'll probably get a nice fuse box and mount it somewhere, maybe over here somewhere on the firewall, and get all this stuff straightened up. But all of this is reliable, and I've got several hundred miles on it. Everything's good. So you know, we're good with that. All right, let's see what else we got. I have this is the wiring here. This will get tidied up as well, but this wiring here is for a fast lift pump. I tried running this setup with the factory 6.4 pump, and it'll work. It's not ideal, I don't think. I don't think it's quite enough fuel, especially this particular setup here has got 150 horse injectors in with the compounds and the Quadzilla. There's a lot of fuel being used when you're under heavy throttle. So, you know, if it was all stock, I think the 6.4 pump would have done okay, but just was not happy with what it looked like on a gauge, so I went to the fast lift pump. And so I've got an oil pressure gauge up here, and this oil pressure line comes down. It reads off of this side of the engine here, and I ran into this, and after a lot of research, I'm you know, feeling a little bit better about things. This is my mechanical gauge here, goes down and gets right in that side of the block. And then I have the Quadzilla reading oil pressure as well. And the Quadzilla reads a little bit lower than the manual gauge by probably as much as 20 psi. But I am told that that has to do with the location of where the oil pressure is being read from. Maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. Maybe I have a bad oil pressure sensor. Anyway, wasn't happy with what I saw on the Quadzilla display, so I put in the manual one so I could actually look at it and see. And I'm pretty happy with the manual one. If I had this to do over, I would do a manual oil pressure and fuel pressure gauge up here on the cowl. That way, if there ever was a leak, it wouldn't be inside the cab. It would hit the cowl here and run over, and this actually drains down outside the truck. So that might be an idea for you guys. I may even change that at some point, put a, you know, a double a double pod here and put in the oil and fuel up here. So the little curly Q line you see right there, that is reading the exhaust back pressure right off the manifold, and I have a gauge in there that shows me drive pressure. And since I was doing a compound setup, I wanted something to show me, you know, how much back pressure I was looking at. So that's what that's about. This sensor right here, right there, that's unhooked, that's the factory 6.4 exhaust pressure sensor. And so I unhooked it in favor of a mechanical gauge, which is that copper line there. I think that is most everything I wanted to show you under the hood. I used the, several people asked the question about what power steering setup. This is the Dodge power steering setup. You can see the cap right there. Not ideal to try to get to it, but easy enough. You can get in there. I probably, if this pump ever gives trouble, this still has the vacuum pump here, the Dodge vacuum pump, and then or I guess Cummins vacuum pump here, and Cummins or Dodge power steering pump there. A lot of guys will get rid of this whole setup here and put in, it's just a hydraulic pump really, that like I think the 4BTs ran them. But anyway, it bolts same location, and you may have to redo your lines a little bit, but I'll probably do that if this ever gives trouble. It's currently not a problem. One other thing I will show you, if we can get to where we can see part of it, you can see part of it right here. I changed out the side cover on this engine for a billet cover, and the reason I did that, the factory steel one was leaking when I got the engine. You could obviously tell it was. I read all the horror stories about how this plate leaks, so I bought this billet plate and, you know, put on here. And I have no idea. This is not the high price one. This is probably the Chinese knockoff that you get off, I believe I got it off of eBay, but Amazon, eBay both have them. So I had a leak, I had an oil leak. That's another thing I've been trying to get done before I made another video. And so I had an oil leak. So the only way to get that plate back off is to pull the VP44 pump up there. And so I had a day off from work here about a week ago, and I pulled all of that apart, took the plate off. And the plate, the design on the plate, if you guys are thinking about buying one of these, I can't speak to the higher priced ones. I'm sure they're better. But on the cheap plate, the plate is actually made really nice. But the O-ring that goes, there's actually one large O-ring that follows the outside diameter of that plate. And then there's several small round O-rings that go behind each bolt that holds the plate on inside the plate. And I pulled it off. And when I put this on originally and cranked the engine, I did not have a terrible oil leak. But after I ran it a while, I developed one, and I thought maybe the bolts were loose, so I tightened everything up, checked it, it's all good. Ended up taking it back apart, and the O-ring had deformed. It was not a pinch type issue. It just, the O-ring almost acted like a piece of cork. It didn't have that rubbery feel to it anymore. So I cleaned everything up really good, and I've got some really high-end silicone. And so anyway, I siliconed everything really, really good. Not supposed to have to do that with an O-ring gasket, but in this case, I had no choice, and put it back on. And it's not leaking now. Now, it looks a little bit greasy right there, but it's just the way the light's hitting it. I can look at it from here. I did not clean everything up great the other day, but it's not leaking, not dripping on the truck, which is a huge blessing, because it was leaking, you know, enough that if you park it somewhere and let it idle, it would have, you know, the size of a silver dollar or a pop bottle underneath of it after just a few minutes. So anyway, got that taken care of. I had a long crank on occasion when the engine was hot, so I'm assuming I must have had a small leak somewhere in one of the injector lines. Got all that tightened back up when I did the engine side plate. It's cranking like it should now, really, really quick. So if you guys have any questions on the wiring on the swap and where I tied in to get key on power, I can give you any information on that as well. I can't recall. I think there's 3 or maybe, actually I think there's 5 wires that are required to get the Cummins to crank. That's where some of these relays come in. And then the rest of it's just, you know, up to you, such as, you know, things like if you're using the factory fuel pump on the Cummins, and if you want to wire in the grid heaters. I wanted mine manually, but you can wire them in automatically if you like. I did custom make the transmission fuel tube. I took the factory one, it's right there, and remade it to the right length and made a bracket to hold it right there. I want to get that clamp gone and do something better right there, but that's sufficient for now. So I think that's everything out of the hood. Let me show you inside the truck, and then I'll show you a couple things under the truck, and we will end the video. So the way this setup works is I've got, let's see if we can get some light on this for just a second. So this is my back pressure gauge, and it tells me, you know, or drive pressure, whichever way you want to look at it, but it tells me the drive pressure as far as when I'm, when I'm seeing the boost. This shows me primary. That's down on the HE351, which shows me, how much boost it's making before it goes into the 369. And then I have the total boost working down here on this gauge and also on the SCT. And then this shows me the drive pressure in the case of, if you're looking at boost here, if you're trying to pull a hill or something, you're looking at boost here. This shows you drive pressure in relation to this gauge and that gauge. But it'll also show you, if I flip the exhaust brake on, it'll show you how much back pressure you're getting with the exhaust brake in a coast type situation. So I've been told that these engines come with a 60-pound valve spring, and you don't ever want to have more than 60 pounds of back pressure. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I'll never need 60 pounds of back pressure. I've got it set to do about 25 pounds max right now, and no more than what I'll ever tow with it. That's all I'll probably ever need. It is adjustable, and you can take 2 1/2-inch wrenches and adjust it up. So I can do that when we take our first trip here at the end of the month and the 1st of April, if it needs to be adjusted. But right now it feels good, so gonna leave that alone. On the SCT, let's try to show you what I'm monitoring there. So I've got the turbo boost right here, which is the same as, it's actually reading the 6.4 map sensor. This gauge and this gauge will be very similar. And then digital readout here for the total boost. I'm reading coolant temp, trans temp, and oil temp right here. Those are using the factory 6.4 sensors, the intake temp as well. This is the pedal position read by the factory Ford pedal throttle position sensor. This EGT right here, and these are old numbers. They're not, the truck's not running, so this is just the last recorded. This EGT here is reading at the very top of my downpipe. So that tells me what the EGT would be after the secondary turbo. Excuse me. This is the Quadzilla Adrenaline. You can see what I'm reading right there. Forgive the dusty mess. I haven't cleaned the truck up yet. This is fuel pressure read at the fast lift pump. ECM voltage, just so I can make sure everything's charging. Fuel temp read by the Cummins. Air temp read by the Cummins. Trans temp. This is a second trans temp with a probe that came with the Quadzilla, plumbed into the 5R110. It runs relatively close to the trans temp over here on the SCT. It stays relatively close. This one is actually reading the current temperature, so don't pay any attention to the difference between this number and the number over on that side. Oil pressure here, read by the Quadzilla. And then this is the manual oil pressure gauge there. You can see it from, excuse me, from inside the cab with no danger of getting oil everywhere if something happens to the gauge. And it does have the backlight hooked up, so if you turn the park lights on or headlights, you have light out there. Then, of course, the timing, coolant temp, and throttle position as read by the Cummins app sensor out on the motor. And then this EGT is reading in the manifold on the Cummins engine. Couple unrelated upgrades I did is, used to have a cigarette lighter plug here. I don't smoke. I don't need a cigarette lighter plug. So I switched out to this particular type of plug here. And you can get these on Amazon. They're fairly cheap. It gives you 2 USB ports. It has a power switch. You turn it on and off like so. Works really good. The reason I did that, I have another cigarette lighter port on the back of the console back here, right there. And that port, something that broke inside and it kept pulling out. So anyway, I upgraded to this here. Great little upgrade. And it takes about an hour to do both of them. So that was well worth the time. So let me show you a couple other things. I have on the truck, some of this related, some unrelated. I have on this switch here, I have lights wired up inside the bed. I have a bed cover on it. I'll show you that in a minute. But these lights here are great if you're trying to get something hooked up or loaded up in the nighttime. This gives you lighting inside the bed. I have underglow lights on the truck. They're wired up to this switch. I have this switch empty for the moment. Not sure what I'll put on it yet, but I will probably put something on there. And then auxiliary 1 is for my exhaust brake. And so I wired up the exhaust brake to where basically this arms the system, so to speak. And then this is the actual on and off, you might say, right here beside the steering wheel, right down there. This is an older unit. Don't make these anymore that I'm aware of. It's from US Gear. It's called a US Gear decelerator. And this button here turns the exhaust brake itself on and off. The reason I put it on the auxiliary switch is so that when I turn the key off on the truck, it kills the auxiliary switches. So none of these lights or the exhaust brake or any of that can possibly stay on or drain power, you know, while the truck's setting and I'm not with it or it's not running. So that's the reason for doing that. So this thing works great. It took a while to get it set up and I had to do a lot of work on it. I've got probably installation and all the odds and ends, probably 6 or 8 hours. And probably half of that is in, you know, just trying to get everything sorted out because it is an older used unit that needed some repair. So, but it works great. I can, like I said, I can do, if I've downshifted to where the engine's at, say, 2,800 RPM, I can get as much as 25 PSI up here. And I think I probably could adjust it to 35 PSI, or maybe 40, maybe more than that. I'm not sure. I haven't tried to get it on up there higher. You might could get 60 PSI, I don't know. But it does what I need it to do, and that's enough. I only want it to make enough back pressure to do what I need and nothing more. So the way it works is, you would turn the auxiliary switch on to arm the system, then you would turn this button on, which would give you, matter of fact, I might can do that right quick. All right, so turn that on, and you see that light blinking. And if you'll listen, the exhaust brake's gonna cycle, I think. Yep. I don't know if you picked that up or not, but 2 times it will cycle the brake on and off, and then it turns itself off. And so then you turn it on and the brake is engaged. It has if you'll watch that light, I'm gonna mash the gas pedal and you see it start blinking. All right, so the exhaust brake is disengaged. Now it's engaged. So that feature, if you, it's got a little micro switch down there. I'll try to show you that in a minute. So that if you are, you know, driving along and you are coasting, and when you come to the bottom of the hill, you give it, you know, just at least a little bit of fuel, disengages the brake so you're not trying to pull against the exhaust brake. That switch right there is for an exhaust cutout. And I'll try to explain that in a minute, but just keep in mind that's what that switch is for. We'll go back there and check it out. So this switch here is for my grid heater. This is my bed cover. And this truck, I've got this board on there just to keep everything from scooting to the front. But that's my 5th wheel hitch right there for the camper. And then up under here, you can see the lights. That's what I did with my fuel additive bottle. There's a little hole in the bed inside right there. It's just an S hook. And drilled a hole underneath this tube here. That way I don't have to keep this thing inside the truck. All right. So that's what I did with the exhaust. Didn't like the dual outlet, and I didn't like it sticking way out. I mean, the factory one stuck on out several inches farther, so I wanted it tucked back a little bit. So that's what I did on that. And I'll show you, I'm trying to show the exhaust brake. There we go. So this right here is my cutout. It's electric cutout. The reason I did that is because sometimes I like the way a Cummins sounds at an idle. Really all the time. But I'm not a huge fan of how it sounds with no muffler, especially if you're trying to tow. So I've got a switch in there. If I want to hear it at idle, I can open that exhaust cutout and it bypasses the muffler back here. All right, so this is the exhaust brake right here. Wiring goes up. There's a solenoid on the inside of the frame, and it's an electric exhaust brake. Again, the name is Decelerator, made by US Gear. And if you look up here at the front, you see that spring right there. So that's the adjustment. That's a bypass. It actually allows, once this valve shuts, and it shuts that butterfly valve, once it reaches a certain spring pressure, it'll bypass the excess exhaust pressure around the butterfly. So that's how the exhaust brake works. One other thing, unrelated, but I got this third brake light also, I believe, off of Amazon. Mine had a bad bulb in it, and I changed that bulb, and then a week later this bulb went bad, so I changed it, and then about 2 weeks later that bulb went bad. So I just changed the whole unit out to LED. Highly recommend that. Very, very bright. So if that's something you're in the market for, I can give you a link on that. It was a very good upgrade. I mounted my 2-meter antenna down here. I had it on a magnet up on the roof, and the problem with it was I like constantly trying to put this thing in and out of my shop. My garage door is really low, so I'd have to unmount the antenna and put it inside the truck. And so anyway, I just mounted it right here. It's not going to work as good, but it'll still work. So I will show you what it sounds like. All right, so sitting here idling, I'm actually even with the exhaust brake on, I'm building back pressure there. I'm gonna mash the gas pedal just enough to get the exhaust brake to kick off. So there's the current readings. And one thing that I did not cover that I would like to talk to you about, that I really like, fairly expensive add-on, but I think it's worth it, especially if you're towing, is the BD. This little block right here, it's a BD tap shifter, and you upgrade to a 2011 plus shift arm with the buttons, and the swap's fairly simple, not a big deal. And so if you guys are interested in that, it's very, very good upgrade. I think worth the money. Maybe not everybody does, but for me it probably would say that it is. And the shifter, you're basically going to disassemble these trim panels on the column and install the shifter, and it's wiring. It plugs into the factory harness, so it's not a big deal. There's a control box goes underneath the dash. I put it down under there and wired it up. There's a pass-through that goes between your OBD 2 port on the truck, and in my case I have SCT, so the pass-through goes in there that allows the system to work. Then there's one connection down underneath the truck for the transmission, and it does what it's supposed to do. There's probably a couple of things that I would like for it to do that it doesn't do, as far as like if you could have full lockup control on the converter, like say if you could set it somehow to where like it would say shift first, second lock, third lock, fifth lock, sixth lock, but it doesn't do that. But you do have manual control. Yeah, there's several different ways you can set it. I won't get into all that for the sake of time, but you can program the thing to where it shifts sooner or later. And then you also have manual control, and the manual control can be as what's the word I'm looking for here, as non-invasive, I guess, all the way up to full manual. And so I just left it. I have custom tuning on the trans anyway, so I just let it shift its own, do its own thing, and then if I want to downshift I can, or whatever the case may be. So that works really good. It'd be worth, I think, the money to have that. If you guys are interested or thinking about doing it, it's a real good add-on. So I was trying to think if there's anything else that I ran into on the swap. All the parts that I used came from, if you go on the Facebook, if you do Facebook, if you go on Cummins Tech, Fummins Tech, and go to that page, you will meet a lot of great guys, and that'll help you along the way as far as wiring and things like that. There's a guy there by the name of Kevin Knoll that does the wiring harnesses, if you'd like to get that done. There is a gentleman there called Mike. I believe the name would be pronounced Fuse, or its last name spelled Fuchs. And so he does all your swap parts, like the adapter plate for the trans and motor mounts, and the adapter plate for the AC and alternator, fan adapter plate, things like that. He can help you out with that. And then a guy by the name of Randy Gillum will take care of your transmission tunes. And then a guy by the name of Larry Barnett is the fellow you want to talk to about converters. This truck here is, I understand that some guys run the factory converter, but I've also heard that the 6.4 trucks that ran the 5R110 ran a higher stall converter than the 6.0 trucks. I don't know how valid that comment is, but with that in mind, I've heard some people say you can get by with a 6.0 converter, but the 6.4 is too high of a stall. I would probably agree with that statement. I had Larry to build me a low stall triple disc billet front plate converter for this swap, just to be sure that everything stayed together when we start pulling that big camper. So anyway, I'm happy with the low stall. It's definitely does a good job. And so if you need a converter, you need to talk to Larry. If you have questions on what to do, how to work out your problems as you do the swap, there's a bunch of guys on that Cummins Tech that can really help you out. And so if you check that thing out, if you're planning on doing a swap, that'd be a great benefit to you. I think that's everything I ran into. Basically, just to tell you how I did it, I used parts from those guys to get the motor physically in the truck. I did do my own wiring harness. I would do it again if I did another swap. I would do my own harness because I have it fresh on my memory. If it's your first time doing it, I will say this: there's a lot of frustration. Even if you have all the pinouts and diagrams, it's going to take some time, and you're probably going to have some do-overs. So just be prepared and be patient, and you'll get it. One of the things you'll run into is if you're doing a Cummins, a 24 valve Cummins in a auto truck, an auto, 5R110 truck, you either need to get a auto ECM for your Cummins. Like if it, you pull your Cummins out of an automatic truck, a Dodge automatic, and use the auto ECM. If you get your motor out of a manual truck, you'll have to have your ECM flashed to an auto calibration, excuse me, Otherwise, you'll have this like a lope or a surge when you pull it into gear. It'll rev up like that. There's some other issues that can cause that. I ran into those issues on this truck and finally found them to do, things to do with the sensors. But I think the main cause is if you try to put a manual ECM in front of an auto trans, it's where you run into that. So just keep that in mind. And let's see what else might be of help to you, things that I ran into. There is a difference between, I believe, the 98.5, 99 ECMs, and then the 2001, 2001, 2002 ECMs, I think are different, because the 24 valve Cummins on the later models used, I believe, only the cam sensor, I think, or maybe they used a cam and crank sensor, but I believe the cam, on this particular truck, the cam has it's an earlier engine, it's a 99, and so it uses the crank sensor, has a tone wheel, and then the cam sensor, I believe it just reads a single position every revolution, maybe, or something, and vice versa. Anyway, there is a difference between the early 24 valve and late 24 valve on I believe, the wiring harness and on the ECM. So you might want to make note of that. I think you can swap ECMs, but you can only do so with custom calibration on the ECM. So just keep that in mind. As far as interchanging parts, if you have a early motor with a late ECM, you may need to get the ECM flashed, or vice versa, to work with your setup, and you may have to change out the wiring harness or modify it to make it work. I did have to shorten the drive shaft. I did that myself. This truck has a 2-piece drive shaft. It has a it has a short drive shaft off of the tail housing on the transfer case back to a carrier bearing, and then a long shaft back to the axle. So I shortened the front shaft, and all I did was just index everything so that the yoke did not get positioned differently than it was originally, except the fact that it was moved back. I think it was 1.5 inches or about 2 inches, but I think 1.5 inches that I moved it back. I don't know if I'll be able to show you this, possibly. So this truck is running the 6.4 fan, but it has an adapter. Let's see if I can get somewhere you can see it. So if you can see that adapter, right, let me get my finger around there. That adapter right there on the back of the fan blades there. Oh, come on, focus. There you go. The aluminum plate that is bolted between the fan and the clutch is an adapter available for mic, and it allows you to run the 6.4 fan and the 5.9 Cummins clutch. So that's what I'm doing on this particular swap. Works great. If you run the 6.4 radiator, the fan, I've never heard my fan kick on. I'm sure it probably has a little bit, but as far as full engagement, I've never heard it come completely on. The engine runs very efficiently and doesn't take as much coolant, I don't think, as a 6.4. So you really have way more radiator capacity than what you need, and certainly more fan capacity than what you need. But it'll work good for you. One mistake I made when you're hooking up your coolant lines, and I turn wrenches every day of my life and mechanic, and grew up, my dad was a mechanic, and I just missed this, and how I did, I don't know. But anyway, you see there's one of my heater hoses coming out back to, well, you can't see it, but anyway, it goes in the firewall right down in there. So I had the heater hoses routed incorrectly. There is a port down here on the front of the water pump, right in that area there, just outside where the water pump goes on. And I had to move the hose from that location and move it down there. If you can see that connector. I had to move it down there to that connector and come over this way to get the coolant to flow. Basically what I had done, and ignorance being my helper, what I had done is I had to hook my hoses up so that they were both on a pressure port, and so no water flowed through and I had no heat. So I had to move one of the hoses from the pressure port, or the pressure side, I guess you'd say, of the system, to the non-pressure side so it would flow. So you might want to take note of that, and maybe make a diagram before you need to run the thing. But I think that's pretty much it, guys. Everything bolted in there really smooth, turned out really good. I'm not, like I said, I want to redo all the wiring, and I'd like to redo my intercooler piping, but everything else I'm happy with. Got my oil leak fixed. Been working on the shift strategy. So everything, you know, it's turned out pretty good. So if you guys have any questions, or if there's anything in particular you'd like for me to comment on, if you'll let me know, I will be glad to do that. And if I can't give you the information that you need, I will try to get you in touch with somebody who can, or a resource that can help you out, okay? So definitely a doable swap, and looking forward to getting this thing finalized, which, to be honest with you, is pretty much done. Other than you know, smoothing up the wiring and the intercooler hoses, I think I'm happy with it all, and getting it detailed out real good. I washed it the other day, but I haven't detailed anything, so get it all detailed out and be ready to go for camping season. We've got a trip planned here in about 2 weeks, and so we'll be pulling, see if I can show it to you. I'll be pulling that camper right there. It's about, I can't remember if it's 30 or 32 feet, and then it has a cargo rack on the back, so it probably weighs about 10, 5, 11, something like that. And as you can see, this is where I live. It's in the mountains of North Carolina, so it's gonna have to do some heavy towing, but we'll check that out in a couple weeks. And hopefully while we're on that trip, and I'm hoping to do some relaxing and some fishing, and hopefully there'll be time we'll do a video, maybe do a video on how the truck towed. So if you guys have any questions, comments, whatever the case may be, anything we can help you with, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll try to be a help to you. And maybe you won't find yourself in a position I did, with a lot of money invested in a truck with a blown motor, and looking at potentially spending about as much to fix the 6.4 as I paid for the truck. Actually probably more to fix the 6.4 than what I paid for the truck. Hope you don't find yourself in that position, but if you do, this is a good way to go. And we'll say this: if your state has anything to do with emissions, like strict emissions around here, that's just safety only, and so not a lot of issue on getting the truck inspected and getting the tag. But if you're in a state where they have strict emissions, then my understanding is you can still do the swap, but you would have to do your motor. If in the case of this, a 2010 truck, you would need a 2010 Cummins, and you would have to have all the emissions intact for it to work right. But anyway, hopefully you don't find yourself in that position, but if you do, you might consider doing the swap. It's I came out for about half the amount of money that it would have costed me to build the 6.4, and the way I got it figured, if this engine crashes and burns on the first trip out, I can either pull it out and rebuild it for a couple $1,000, or or I can replace it for $2,500 to $3,000, something like that, and be back on the road. I honestly believe that I could probably, in 10 to 12 hours, I think I could have that engine out and have the other engine setting in and ready to go. So in my opinion, on all accounts, it's a better situation. So hope that helps you guys out. Let me know if I can be any more help to you, and try to help you any way we can. Okay, all right, hope you have a wonderful evening, and God bless your Sunday. Hope you get some rest. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will consider a great honor if you do that. Have a good one. See you guys.